I'd like to welcome everyone to Deeper Inside Project Democracy, a very special edition, live edition with Rhiannon Giddens. As I'm sure most of you know, hometown girl to Greensboro and this area. And we're doing this through the Greensboro History Museum. We'll do some quick introductions here for anyone who doesn't, I'm sure there's people who don't know who I am, but yeah, there may be one or two who doesn't know Rhiannon's creds, so we'll go through that quickly. Rhiannon is a MacArthur Genius Grant recipient. She has been nominated for 6 Grammys and won a Grammy as a founding member of the Carolina Chocolate Drops, an amazing group from this area. She has recently put out a new album, There Is No Other, with her partner, Francesco Turrisi. That has also been Grammy nominated. She has performed for the Obamas at the White House. I am so jealous. She was on 2 seasons of Nashville, which was a great television show. She was also part of Ken Burns' country music series, a personal hero of mine. She has also put out, which we're going to talk about in a moment, co-produced and was part of putting together an album named Songs of Our Native Daughters in 2019. I'm not going to say too much more about that at the moment because that's one of the first things we're going to talk about. And then finally, a quote from Pitchfork: "Few artists are so fearless and so ravenous in their exploration." And Smithsonian Magazine calls Rhiannon an electrifying artist who brings alive the memories of forgotten predecessors, white and black. So with all of that, thank you for being here today. And let me give my creds. I'm curator of exhibits for Greensboro History Museum. So there we go. So yeah, I'm the person who helps develop and designs all the exhibits for the History Museum in Greensboro. So fantastic. Again, welcome. It's obviously a very special day, and when you had mentioned that June 19th would be a date you would be available to do this, we all kind of cheered for the obvious reason. So happy June 19th, Freedom Day. It's special in so many ways, and we couldn't be doing this at a more historic moment probably than considering everything that's going on in the world currently, and also right here in Greensboro. So that does put a whole new spin on all of this. One of the reasons that I particularly wanted to speak with you today is the way that you combine your music and history. And it brings those two things together in a great crossroads. And the center of that, I believe, is storytelling. It's finding all those amazing stories from past lives. And a lot of times when people think of history, we go back to classes in high school or wherever, and you go, oh my God, I had to learn all those dates and all those names, and I was bored and it was horrible, and I don't want to talk about history anymore. But the reality is the center of history are people's stories, and it's people's lives. And that intersection, it's something the arts can do. And I do consider exhibit design also an art. It can bring empathy to all of this, and it can make all of those things truly come alive for us. And so with that said, and kind of the setup to this, I'd like to start by looking at one of your 2 albums that's come out in 2019, the Songs of Our Native Daughters, which I've been going through both of your albums for the past 2 weeks repeatedly. And as a fan, I have to say this album is incredible. But for just a moment, I could imagine the pitch for this album of, okay, so we have 4 Black female banjo players who's going to do an album of old-timey music. And thinking of that, and I don't know if it went to, thank God for Smithsonian Folkways that I believe put this album out. It is talk about the collection. Well, first of all, let's start with the four people that's on it. Besides you, if you could just for a moment mention the other three, because they're all incredible musicians.
So there's Allison Russell, who's in a group called Birds of Chicago, but she's somebody that I've known for a long time. I've known longest of any of the ladies. We were raisins in the oatmeal together, as you would say at folk festivals, and we kept crossing paths and just starting to get we'd be put on the same panels as the few black people at these Canadian festivals. And I don't know, she's just always struck me with just her spirit and her talent, and her she's had her life hasn't been easy, and the fact that she has chosen the way of love and redemption, and not being able to unflinchingly look at the past, of herself and also of her countries, because she lives in the States, but she's Canadian. And there's Layla McCalla, who is an incredible cellist, guitar player, instrumentalist, singer, songwriter, who lives in New Orleans. Her family is Haitian, Haitian American, and both her parents are from Haiti. And so she's really dug deep into the historical and cultural ramifications of Haiti, and also the connection to Louisiana. So she used to be in the Chocolate Drops. And then the newest to me member is Amethyst Kia, and I reached out to her when I saw a YouTube of her singing Trouble So Hard at the Cambridge Folk Festival, and I started kind of pulling her into the orbit. And then when this project came along, she seemed a real natural fit, because her songwriting's super strong and her voice is really unique and beautiful. And the record didn't start out as, let me get three other black women banjo players to play old time tunes. The record actually started out as a rumination on minstrelsy, and trying to take these aspects of that, and what do you do with it, and connecting it to the historical record. And that kind of morphed and grew and changed as I talked about it with Hal Shippers, who used to be head of Smithsonian Folkways. For some bizarre reason, they have let him go. I'm not sure why, but anyway, because he's brilliant. And he's a driving force behind the record, as was Greg Adams. And then also, of course, Dirk Powell, who was my co-producer, and just all around amazing spirit, who was really instrumental in the record being done. So it really kind of started off in one way and kind of morphed as these things do. The project takes on a spirit of its own, and as soon as the idea of bringing these three ladies in, it just solidified. And then when they started writing songs and we started writing songs together, I was like, whoa, this is even better than I could even have anticipated. So
it's the songs on this are so powerful, and they range from just tearing you apart from the emotion or lifting you up. I'd love to be able to geek out and go through song by song just alone on this album. They're so great. Mama's Crying Long, if you can get that through that song without listening to it in just tears, talk about that one just for a moment, if you would.
Yeah, that's actually an old song that I've been sitting on, waiting for the right moment. I was writing these songs inspired by slave narratives. Julie is one. At the Purchaser's Option is a later one, and this kind of idea. And that one came from a story that I read in a book and just tore me to pieces. And it came out as a children's song, and I held it back until the right time came. And so when these ladies, when we all came together as this group, I was like, this is what the song has been waiting for, was to sing it with them, and to have that kind of support, because I can't even sing. We were at the Cambridge Folk, not Cambridge, we were at the Newport Folk Festival, and it was my last time, it was our fifth show in a row, and I'd gotten through all of the shows not crying, singing that song, and then that was the one where I turned and I saw my son, 7 years old on the side of the stage, and I completely lost it. I mean, it took me some strength of will to get through that song. the audience was crying. I was crying. It was crazy,
And the
you
point
know,
of view is from the child in
from
the
the child.
song,
Yeah.
yeah, of
Yeah.
watching his mother being killed, being raped and killed. It is a great song, but it is an emotionally deep song to listen to.
Yeah, it's one of those there's a type of song that kind of comes through me. You
Hmm.
know, it's like I read something, it sort of processes itself in me, and then the song comes out. Like that song literally, it's a weird time meter. I don't even know. It's like an 11 or 13 or so.
Yeah,
I don't even
yeah.
know.
Oh,
And it came out just like that. You know, I mean, there's songs that I've crafted and I've, shaped and I've, and that one just, and so
yeah,
those are the ones where I really feel like I just shepherded them. I didn't really write them. I was just
right,
chosen as the vessel for that
right,
song.
right. Well, it's stunning.
Thank you.
Another song I'd like to touch on is a very different song from that one, and that's "Better Get Your Learning."
Yeah.
Which that one again, it's an old, it's not an original piece,
Well,
but
the tune isn't original. The words are original.
the words are original.
I
Oh,
wrote the,
neat.
yeah.
And the lyric that struck me, and particularly about today and everything we're talking about, is the white folks, they will write the show. If you can't read, you'll never know. Which I think, just when you consider the history of June of today, and also the history of Wilmington, let alone Tulsa, which
Yeah.
we're not going to have time to get into Tulsa at all, but that it speaks to all that. It speaks to the erasure of history. It speaks to the fact that if a group of people are kept from being literate, there's so much that can just keep them down for
Yeah. I mean,
years.
another verse, which is even, more salient to today, was the year was 1863. A paper said that I was free, but no one read
Hmm.
it to my ears. So I slaved for 2 more years. And, that song came out of, I mean, I took a minstrel tune, that I learned from their first minstrel tutor. And then I said, what would actual black folk trying to say rather than these terrible lyrics that go along with some of these songs.
Right.
And the thing that kind of overwhelms you when you read about the period after emancipation and the period leading up to emancipation and right after it is the thing that the enslaved people, formerly enslaved people, wanted the most was education. It was like they knew it's like we got to get in the game, and to get in the game we got to know what's going on, because otherwise all this stuff is happening and we're at the mercy of the system. And that focus on education, it was massive. And so many people trained to be teachers and then went back to the South. It was just, there was this kind of, we need to lift ourselves up, feeling that I wanted
Right.
to capture.
Right. And to the point where it was even made illegal in some areas for blacks to be able to learn to read and write.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I
yeah.
mean, people. I
Yeah.
mean, like the folks at the top, they know. They
Yeah.
they know how dangerous education is. That's why they've been gutting our education for the last 40 years. I mean,
Exactly.
they know exactly what they're doing,
Hmm.
and so it's really important to just be open and talk about it and go, this is what's happening. How are we going to stop it? How are we going to reverse it?
Absolutely. And moving then into Wilmington a bit, here is a prime example of the erasure of history and keeping an event, keeping knowledge from not only a group of people, but everyone. It is considering the scope of this and its importance in history, and Tulsa and some others as well. It is incredible that this is not in history books. Most people never knew about this. I didn't. I'm not from North Carolina, although I've been here for a lot of years now. I never knew about Wilmington until a few years ago. I didn't know about Tulsa until a few years ago. The fact that events like this can go and that can even happen is stunning. But I read. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I think it's a really important point because not knowing of these events, things like Wilmington, things like Tulsa. There's many, many others actually. There's like a whole long line of things that were done in order to dismantle Black progress, to
Hmm.
dismantle the Black community. There's so many things that aren't common knowledge. And so what that does is it feeds into the idea that Black people are just lazy, Black people are stupid, we can't, and then it also feeds into the other side of, folks who are working class white folks maybe who did, who also don't have a lot of advantages, but they go, well, why don't you do it? Why can't you pull yourself up by your bootstraps? We're all the same here. And it's like, well, in some ways, yes, we are. In a lot of ways, we're not, and the way that the history is taught, it feeds into that. And so that can cause all sorts of things that we're not even aware of that get kind of hard baked into our culture and contribute to things like what's going on right now,
Well, I
So,
saw a quote this morning that if Black Lives Matter were taught in the schools, it wouldn't be in the streets today.
I mean, this stuff is always, these kind of protests are always the voices of people who have been disregarded and unheard. I mean, this is nothing new, and this is nothing new even in this country. There have been, I mean, the fact that there's so many now and it's gotten so big and it's been kind of globally recognized, that's new and that's amazing because
Hmm.
it's making people wake up and it's making people set up, and that's what it's for. But yeah, absolutely, if the system is changed, if the system is corrected, there's no need for these protests because people are protesting because there's something to protest and to bring attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. So Wilmington, I had recently read that one of your projects, an ongoing project, is creating a musical, I believe, around the events of Wilmington in 1898.
That is, it's like it's a long form because
Right.
I'm working with John Jeremiah Sullivan, who's an amazing writer, researcher, like all around good guy, and who lives in Wilmington, and he's been doing some incredible research down there, and I'm waiting until he's done because
Hmm.
the story gets more and more incredible. And I'm not at liberty to share any of his work until he's
Sure.
done, but it's very, very deep and it's very, very echoey of what's going on today. And so
Hmm.
I think it's going to be extremely relevant. So, it's like I got the long finger on it. It's like always there, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's the new thing that he's found. Okay, this is great, but I gotta wait, because I want to get the
Sure.
whole story,
Sure.
and then, but I've talked about it because I want, when I get to that point, I want to be able to go, and have everything in place to go for it. But whatever the project, however it turns out, what kind of project it is, what kind, if it's a musical, if it's,
Hmm.
it doesn't matter. It's going to be something that's going to be dealing with that. And so, yeah, that's kind of always there. And it gives me an opportunity to also just bring it up and talk about it because, it's something that I don't think can be talked about enough.
Well, and speaking of, I will bet there are people listening to this conversation right now who still really have no idea, perhaps even what we're talking about. Could you give that a really brief background into Wilmington, 1898?
Wilmington, at the point in 1898 that this happens, Wilmington is a majority Black city. There's a lot of Black prosperity in the city. There's actually a group that's being formed politically called the Fusionist, which is working class white and Black folks who are joining up to try to dislodge the power of the white supremacists. And that doesn't go down well. They get some political success, and the other side pretty much uses the KKK as a weapon to destabilize, to threaten violence, and the basically there's a coup. It's like the only like straight up political coup in American history, as far as I know,
It
where
was, yes.
rightfully elected people are deposed and sent out of the city. Blacks and whites are sent out of the city. A lot of Black folk are killed, just straight up shot in the streets, or they die because they had to hide in the swamps for days, and then they get sick and they die. We don't know the total, but it pretty much changed the composition of Wilmington almost overnight. And a lot of the wealth that had been in Black hands was seamlessly moved to white hands, and the folks who were driven out were pretty much in exile. A lot of them for the rest of their lives, and so it was just a straight up white supremacist coup, and it's one that we aren't taught. I wasn't taught
Right.
this in school. Not that I remember. I'm kind of like, if I forgot that, then that's on me. But I don't
No,
remember being taught that.
I'm sure.
And it's just, I feel that it's an important, because not just by itself, but as a part of the pattern. Because before Tulsa, there is Wilmington.
Yes.
Tulsa is an even bigger, thing, but the Wilmington almost is. I think they're the same. It's just that when it happened in Wilmington, they realized that those tactics worked, and so
Well,
you start seeing that kind of intimidation that went on.
and the other thing about Wilmington is that it literally set up the Jim Crow laws and segregation in the South for decades. And
Yeah.
it started in Wilmington, and that became the blueprint for so much of this. So yeah, 1898.
Because the federal government completely went.
Exactly. Exactly.
Is it
It is.
done? Is it
Yeah.
done? Oh, okay, okay, great. How y'all doing down in Wilmington? I mean,
Yeah.
so they were
The
like, "Oh, good, this works, fabulous. Let's do it again."
the background of the couple of decades leading up to Wilmington and what was the almost conspiracy to form this white supremacist movement is amazing. If if it wasn't recorded history at this point, where it has been, a lot of it has been put out. You read it
I
and
mean, the
go,
amazing thing is
no,
that these guys were not hiding any of it.
yeah,
Especially right after it happened. Like they talk about it openly. After a while, they start figuring out, oh, actually, maybe we shouldn't be bragging about this. But there's plenty of evidence that they were completely open about it. And this is the thing that's hard for people to understand.
well, and I don't know if you've heard, and this has occurred just in the last couple of days. So the Raleigh News and Observer, which at that period in time was it was a propaganda machine for the white supremacist movement, and largely due to Josephus Daniels, who ran the paper at that point. His statue has been in Raleigh, and that statue was just torn down in the last week with the family's blessing. Um,
Great.
yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. So
They've had their day.
yeah,
You know,
yes,
they have had their day.
they have had their day. Um, in thinking, we're already getting close to time here. So what the thought of bringing those voices that are literally buried in unmarked graves a lot of times in Wilmington is has to be daunting as this whatever this project turns out to be has to be a daunting thing to then bring these voices to life.
I mean, it always is, but that is my job. It's like I always say, the least I can do is read about this and write about it and talk about it and sing about it, because I didn't have to live it.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
a lot of people had to live this stuff, and that's part of my job is to bring names back into it, or even making them up.
hmm
It's just to provide faces, just to provide personalities for these stories that have been sort of suppressed or sat on or forgotten about. Like the opera that was supposed to debut this year, but it'll be next year because it's been postponed. About Omar bin Said, another North Carolina fascinating figure from North Carolina, Islamic scholar, sold into slavery, snatched from the shores of Senegal, and ends up in Fayetteville for 50 years. Dies as still enslaved, and writes his autobiography in Arabic. I mean, these are the stories that, when we know about them, and to have an opera named Omar, that is like, he is not a nameless, voiceless person. He's got a voice, he's got a name, he is a person. And the more that we can put those faces to these aspects of African American history, we have statues, we have names, dates, we have people can trace their lineage back to whatever in England, 1411, whatever. There's so much in the Black community that we don't have because of the way that we were brought here, because of the way that our history was. They attempted to erase it. And so when we have these stories, it's even more imperative to bring light to them and to go, this is Omar. He is one of many Muslims that were brought to the United States. He was one of many people trying to maintain his religion in a new land. He was one of many trying to figure out how to navigate in, a place where he didn't know the language, where he didn't know the customs. One of many, but he does have a name. So it's you work with what you have, but we haven't even been doing that, really. So it's a kudos out there to some of the performing arts organizations who are seeing that. And so they, Spoleto USA commissioned me to write that opera. Nashville Ballet commissioned me to write a ballet about Lucy Negro, who may have inspired Shakespeare to write the Dark Lady sonnets. I mean, Carnegie Hall, has me on as a prospective artist to talk about minstrelsy. I mean, there are people not scared to provide spaces for artists to talk about these things. And so that's a really wonderful change that I see.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I had mentioned to you, I caught your session with Carnegie Hall about minstrels last night, and it was excellent. And getting that history also out there is so important. And and thank you for doing all of this.
Do you mind if we answer a couple? Can we answer?
No,
of these
absolutely.
questions?
And that's where, if you have time, I would love to go do this. Are you able to see?
So
Are
I
you able
can
to
see them. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So we won't hear any music today because I've been doing nothing but make videos all week. So just
Sure.
talking. I have a new video out today actually with Yo Yo Ma. It's a song that I wrote inspired by, I don't know, it was one of those that just kind of came out. It's called Build a House. So that's now on my platform and his platform. So if you want to check that out, you can. Last night's session for Carnegie Hall was recorded. It'll be up for 3 months, and it's on my Facebook and Carnegie Hall's Facebook. And my thoughts in performing works that are traditional, but now be maybe socially and politically incorrect. I mean, it's a really good question because when you look at 80% of our folk songs that we learn in school come from minstrelsy, and they've been bowdlerized or sort of cleaned up. The word darky has been taken out, and that's not a bad thing. But what happens is that we don't understand. Since we don't talk about minstrelsy, it'd be one thing if we contextualize these songs and we talked about where they came from and we talked about the racism that they were born out of and we talked about how that affects us today, and then we figure out what are we going to do with these songs. That's not what happens. Basically, they're kind of cleaned up and then they're just taught like these good old, wholesome American songs, and that's a problem. So, I've been kind of trying to approach these things. I know a lot of old time musicians, sing or play a lot of these old tunes, which are, very much out of that kind of era. And this is something that people are now starting to, okay, how do I grapple with this and be sensitive to where it came from? And I think it's a different answer for every person, but I think knowledge is the only way to get there. Whatever the answer is for you as a performer, as an educator, the only answer is knowledge. Is knowing where they came from. There's a lot of scholarship. There's no excuse not to know because there's so much great scholarship out there now. And so, like, what I do personally with these songs is that I either change the words to something completely different, or I contextualize them, or I find a version like Underneath the Harlem Moon that somebody else has already done that with. Like Ethel Waters did this amazing version of that, which was originally a coon song. There's, I think, a lot of ways to be creative. And to create a way that people can understand that you are paying homage. Because the thing is, like, also the people who created these songs and sang these songs were musicians. And the music itself shouldn't be erased because the way the song came into being, in a racist society. We have to figure out a way to pay respect to the music and to all the musicians, whether they were in blackface or not. I mean, I don't agree with blackface and I think it's terrible and I'm glad we're not doing it anymore, but I also understand at a certain time in a certain era, that was the entertainment, and even, black people had to do it. So it's like you kind of have to figure out where you sit in all of that. But it's complicated and it takes a while. So I think being willing to just take the time with it is really important. I mean, I've been sitting with some of these songs for years and years, and there's still some songs that I won't sing, because
Sure.
they don't feel right, or I haven't figured out a way to do it, or it's not worth the time. because there's a lot of really cool stuff that, we can figure out how to deal with. So
yeah, and the very name Jim Crow comes from the minstrel shows. And
yeah,
the character.
yeah. I mean, people go, well, how harmful is Aunt Jemima? Like, that I grew up eating that pan. So did I. So did
Yeah.
I. But I still look at the image. No matter what model they use, Nancy Green, who is very cool, like her life, she's a really really cool person. But they didn't call it Nancy Green, did they?
Right.
If they called it Nancy Green, it's an honor of Nancy Green, and that'd be one thing. But they call it Aunt Jemima, so it's I think people just need to be willing to be open and listen to how people feel affected by these things. People aren't being snowflakes. They're going, this is part of a systemic, effort to keep Black people painted a certain way. So why is that? How is that good?
Yeah. Perhaps if we just take some time and listen to each other and hear what folks are saying.
Yeah, exactly.
And have a conversation.
Hard to do these days.
It is hard to do these days. Were there anything else in the questions that struck you that?
I think we got. I think we got everything. I mean,
yeah,
educating younger listeners. I mean, I just talk about it very, very point blank. I just talk about it, and I know what I'm talking about, and I'm willing to say when I don't. You know what I mean? And I'm willing to point to the people who do know. And I think young people feel that they feel the honesty, and they're savvy, and they have access to materials that I didn't have access to when I was their age,
Right.
So I just think being very honest with them is the right way to go.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to end this with a quote that I recently, and I put this out on another video, and it's by a quote from Janetta Coles, who was the president of Bennett College for a number of years. And recently on a Smithsonian webinar, she said during this time, and she harkened back to the 60s, the phrase in the 60s, keep the faith, but do the work. And I think doing the work today is what we all need to do, and we keep that in mind. What can we do? We do the work to just
do the work and be engaged in your community. Be engaged with what's being taught in the schools. Be engaged with where are those school books coming from? Where are those textbooks coming from? Some random place in Texas? Who's writing them? What is their lens? I mean, we have to get off of the TV. We got to get off the Netflix. I have no problem with Netflix. There's a lot of stuff I don't watch a ton, but there's beautiful things that can happen on TV, Netflix, video games. I have no problem with mass media, but I do think that we're too involved in fictional lives and not enough involved in real lives, like around the corner. So It's like we also have to re-engage with what it means to be civically, present, and what it means to be a community.
Right. And plugging our history museum for a moment, there's a source, not just us, but any good museum. When we're able to get back out into public spaces, go to museums, hear the stories, read the stories, see the stories, get the background. It goes a long way. Well, thank you for taking the time for doing this today. We deeply, deeply appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Your voice is such a great addition to this. So thank you. Thank you for joining us today for this very special edition of Deeper Inside Project Democracy.